Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up, nearing 200 subscribers. Still rocking and rolling. Minicamp has come and gone for the Green Bay Packers. Now they get, 5-6 weeks off, somewhere around that, before training camp begins. So there's a little bit of a blank period here. I wanted to after these first couple sessions of OTAs, mandatory minicamp, kind of look at the grand scheme of things and how that 53-man roster could be taking shape for the Packers. And so that's the purpose of this video today. It's sort of a post-mandatory minicamp 53-man roster projection for Green Bay. And I think some positions are pretty obvious, right? Like quarterback should be pretty obvious. I think tight end, as far as the numbers, I'll say the numbers at tight end are pretty obvious. Things of that nature. Inside linebacker seems pretty obvious as far as the numbers. But then you have wide receiver, you have offensive line, you have defensive end, you have cornerback, safety. And I think there are looming questions that will be resolved and have conclusions and answers as training camp takes place and then the preseason, so Green Bay can finally cut it down to a 53-man roster. But we're going to look at it today, kind of how I see it taking shape, and I expect a varying degree of differences from those of you watching it. That's completely fine. I went outside sort of the normal parameters for one of the positions. We'll just get right to it. And let's start with quarterback, and for me, this was one of the more simple ones. It's two. I have two roster spots on the 53-man for Green Bay being taken by the quarterback spot. It's Jordan Love and it's Malik Willis. I have Sean Clifford being cut, and Taylor Elgersma, the Canadian prospect, maybe a guy you try to get on the practice squad. And, although he's from Canada, he is not eligible for the International Player Pathway Program, and it's an international program, so you would think Elgersma would be eligible for it, but he's not because it includes Canada, so maybe there's a chance Green Bay tries to get him on the practice squad if they're sort of enamored with him after training camp and after the preseason. I don't see a scenario where they keep three quarterbacks. It's hard for me to imagine Sean Clifford getting a third quarterback spot, or at this point really even a practice squad position. Keep in mind, Malik Willis is not the backup quarterback for the Green Bay Packers if Sean Clifford or Michael Pratt stepped up and delivered last summer, and both underwhelmed to the point where Goody looked around and said, we need to address this backup quarterback position and sort of nip this in the bud, and they go out and they get Malik Willis, who dazzled in his opportunities when Jordan Love on a couple of occasions went down with injuries and missed time during the 2024 campaign. And so to me, it's Love, it's Willis, your top two spots. You're not going to reserve a third spot on the roster for a quarterback. I see Sean Clifford getting cut, and Elgersma maybe gets a practice squad spot. But remember, not eligible for the International Player Pathway Program. So quarterback, I got two. Running back, this is going to be a position that gets a lot of attention from the numbers standpoint. I went with three. I know a lot of people might go with four. I went with three, the locks being Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd, and that third and final spot for me went to Emmanuel Wilson, meaning Chris Brooks gets cut, ends up on the outside looking in. Josh Jacobs is your bell cow. Marshawn Lloyd, you used a decently high pick in the draft. Was it a third rounder you used on Marshawn Lloyd a year ago? Didn't get to see him. Multiple injuries, appendicitis at the back end of the 2024 season when it appeared he was ready to come back. Sort of put a damper on any of those thoughts or ideas for the Packers. But Lloyd, certainly a lock to make the roster this year for the Packers. And so that third spot to me, I chose Emmanuel Wilson over Chris Brooks. And here's why. Let's start with Brooks, actually. Brooks is the better pass blocker at the running back position. Chris Brooks can be used in a couple of different ways on special teams. We know that will, dazzle for Rich Bisaccia and some ideas he may have. And so when you're going through and you're checking boxes, and we know how much Green Bay values versatility, Chris Brooks offers you more in pass blocking and pass protection. And I think Emmanuel Wilson might be getting a little better at it, but Brooks is still superior, and Brooks gives you something on teams if you opted to go that route. To me, I went with Emmanuel Wilson for one big reason. Josh Jacobs is your bell cow back, but and I don't know if it's even fair for teams to think of it in terms like this, what I'm about to say, but this is just how I went about it. If Josh Jacobs were to go down with an injury and let's say, miss 2, 3, 4 games, whatever, heaven forbid, I do not think Green Bay would go to a plan of, all right, next in line is Marshawn Lloyd, he becomes a bell cow. I believe the Packers would want to pivot towards, let's just, let Lloyd and the third stringer, and in this case for me it was Emmanuel Wilson, sort of be in a 50-50 timeshare, a 1A, 1B kind of thing at running back until Jacobs gets back. And for that, to me, Emmanuel Wilson is the better pure runner. If you're turning around and just handing it off to someone, to me, you'd rather hand it off to Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks based off how they run the ball and the effectiveness of it and the sample size we've seen from both. And so for me, it was, hey, Emmanuel Wilson's the better pure runner. And if you're put in a spot where, Lloyd goes down with an injury, and we saw, he didn't see the field last year because of injuries, then all of a sudden your backup running back behind Jacobs becomes that much more important. Jacobs is the bell cow, but I think Green Bay would like to lessen the load a little bit on his plate this year. And from that aspect, to me, I think you'd rather have the better, true, pure runner in Emmanuel Wilson than Chris Brooks. Now, the other angle you could take to this, and I'm sure many will, is just keep 4 running backs. Keep Jacobs, Lloyd, Wilson, keep Brooks. He can offer you some help on teams. I mentioned the pass protection. He's better than Emmanuel Wilson at this stage in their careers. I kept 3. There's reasons for that because I stacked up elsewhere. So Jacobs, Lloyd, Wilson, Chris Brooks, I have getting cut. This is, again, post-minicamp, Packers 53-man roster. Mitch Am on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Wide receiver, so fascinating. I kept an uncomfortable number for me. I kept 7. Wanted 6. I know most teams don't keep 7. Even on game days, a lot of teams will just have 5 active. I kept 7, and I just... the numbers game blended with the versatility on the back end of the 7 that I kept helped sort of cushion the blow for me being uncomfortable keeping 7 wide receivers on the 53-man roster. To me, there's 5 locks: Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, and then your 2 rookies, first-round pick Matthew Golden, third-round pick Savion Williams out of TCU. Christian Watson will start the year on the PUP list, physically unable to perform list. Then you have a slew of other receivers. I would say there's a tier with Mecole Hardman, Malik Heath, and Bo Melton, and then there's a tier with a couple of undrafted free agents. I opted to keep, along with Dobbs, Reed, Wicks, Golden, and Williams, Mecole Hardman and Bo Melton. So to me, Malik Heath got cut. And as far as practice squad, to me, and this is a compliment to Malik Heath, if I'm Malik Heath, I don't know if I want the practice squad opportunity with the Packers because I think he could make a 53-man roster somewhere else. I do think he's sort of established that or right near that threshold. Again, it's just a numbers game with Green Bay on the back end and the versatility. And the versatility I'm talking about with Mecole Hardman, he's the veteran of the group. And hey, this is a post-minicamp 53-man roster. By all accounts, Mecole Hardman had a pretty damn good minicamp. So that matters. That factors into this decision for me to say right now I would put him on the 53-man roster. And secondarily, you're talking about a guy who very well could be, if he makes the roster, Green Bay's punt returner. Maybe you sprinkle him in on kick return. I don't know, is Keyshawn Nixon now more welcoming and open to the idea of being the kick returner again? Who knows? But Mecole Hardman gives you versatility. And Bo Melton, that's the name of the game for him. He's a really, really good chess piece on the board for Rich Bisaccia on special teams. Whether it's punt return, kick return, punt coverage, kick coverage, things of that nature for Green Bay. And then we all know about the experiment they're trying with him at corner. I don't think at this point you can count Bo Melton as a true cornerback depth piece, but they're flirting with the idea. They're trying it out, or they tried it out in mandatory minicamp, so we'll see. I think Bo Melton, even as a receiver, is close to warranting enough on a 53-man roster. The speed, the ability to get vertical. Again, I mentioned in a recent video, he had a big touchdown catch 2 years ago in a playoff game in Santa Clara against San Francisco. All that stuff matters. You can rely upon him. So, yeah, I would have preferred to keep 6 wide receivers. I went with 7 just because of the versatility, and I do think Malik Heath is a guy that might end up, if he gets released by the Packers, he could end up on someone else's 53-man roster. So we'll see. And then Christian Watson starts the year on the PUP list, and then when he comes back, you have 6 locks, and then things can really get sort of dicey on that back end for Hardman and Bo Melton, depending on how their years are going. So I have 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 7 wide receivers, and we get to a point now with tight end where, to me, it seems obvious. You're keeping 3, and Tucker Kraft's your 1, Luke Musgrave's your 2. And then to me, it'll ultimately come down to John Fitzpatrick or Ben Sims. I kept Ben Sims, been with Green Bay a year longer. Fitzpatrick was brought over was it October from Atlanta's practice squad. Ben Sims, even if it's more familiarity within the offense, he had a larger role. last year on the team than Fitzpatrick did when he was brought in October. I kept Sims as the third guy and John Fitzpatrick on the outside looking in. But again, to me, tight end is pretty cut and dried. It's 3. That should be the number, I would think. Maybe some of you see a pathway to 4 where you keep Sims and Fitzpatrick. I just kept 3 where Tucker Kraft's your clear and obvious number 1, Luke Musgrave's your clear and obvious number 2, and then Ben Sims is your 3. Now, where things can get dicey is, like with Marshawn Lloyd last year, it's not his fault. Multiple injuries, didn't even see the field as a rookie. Luke Musgrave has not only been injury prone, they've been significant injuries that have cost him most of his first 2 years in the NFL. And so while Tucker Kraft is your clear-cut number 1 tight end, Musgrave entering the season should be your clear-cut number 2, but if he goes down or that injury bug bites again, all of a sudden you're taking a pretty big depth hit at tight end. And then, it could just lend some credence to the idea that maybe Green Bay would be more open to keeping 4, but then you're trimming down somewhere else. And again, my final 53-man roster at this point in the middle of June, as we exit mandatory minicamp, it is not the gospel. It is not the be-all, end-all, and I'm open to hearing multiple different ideas. I'm sure some of you have 4 running backs and 6 wide receivers. I'm sure some of you have 4 tight ends. We'll get to offensive line in a second here. I only have 9. I'm sure plenty of you have 10. It's all fine and dandy. So mine is not the be-all, end-all. It's just how I would take the approach right now, and how I would take the approach at tight end is start the year with 3, see how it goes with Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave, and Ben Sims. Offensive line, 9, ties together because I picked 9 up front for the offensive line. I think you have some locks, obviously. Like Rasheed Walker's a lock, Jordan Morgan's a lock, Zach Tom's a lock, Anthony Belton, Aaron Banks, Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan. So you have 7 to me out of the chute that, they're going to be on the final 53-man roster. Again, it's Walker, Morgan, Tom, Belton, Banks, Jenkins, Ryan. You're not convincing me out of that group. One of those guys isn't making the final 53-man roster unless there's some unforeseen trade, right? We know Walker, Ryan, Tom are entering the final year of their rookie deals. Tom should be getting a hefty payday, one would think. Walker and Ryan, maybe not so much as a shirt on that front, so maybe one of them, if Jordan Morgan beats out Rasheed Walker at left tackle, could entertain a trade for Walker, but Green Bay loves their depth, their versatility. I think there's 7 locks. There's 7 locks on the offensive line, and then you start flirting with that final number again. Do you want 10? Do you want 9? I landed at 9, and here the other 2 names, outside of the ones I just mentioned, Jacob Monk to me is close to being a lock. He worked with the ones a little bit in mandatory minicamp. You drafted him last year out of Duke. And keep in mind, at Duke, Jacob Monk started at right tackle for a full season, started at right guard for a full season, and then transitioned to center. That's a dude with legitimate versatility. Green Bay knows it. Now you're locked in on some spots up front, right? Aaron Banks is going to be your starting left guard. Elton Jenkins is going to be your starting center. Zach Tom's going to be your starting right tackle. You would think Sean Ryan's your right guard, and then Morgan and Walker duke it out for left tackle. But having depth with versatility blended together, Green Bay loves it. We know it. I talk about it all the time in some of these videos. Jacob Monk, I think most see him as hey, he'll slot in as the backup center to Elton Jenkins, and there we go. Leave it at that. But he does have, in his past, experience at tackle and guard, playing in the ACC at Duke. He used a draft pick on him last year. To me, he was really close to me saying you have 8 locks up front on the offensive line, but I put him, I guess, just a tier below that in terms of comfortability with whether or not he's a lock or not. But I have Jacob Monk, and then I went with Travis Glover, 6th rounder last year, big frame. We saw when Elton Jenkins went down in the playoff game against Philadelphia in January that they went to Glover and they went to Kadeem Telford, who we'll get to in a second here, and it wasn't good. What Glover showed you in that game against the Eagles, he looked overwhelmed. He looked outmatched. That's a rookie 6th-round pick who didn't play at all for you in the regular season, and then you're throwing him to that Philadelphia front in a playoff game in a do-or-die scenario on the road where he wasn't expecting to play at all in that game. It wasn't like Elton Jenkins got hurt in practice and lead up to the game. It was during the game early on, and they're like, Glover, go. And it was a disaster. It wasn't good. But we see the size, right, with Belton. It's a big offensive lineman, a big tackle at North Carolina State, but Green Bay could try to use him at guard. We see the size with Aaron Banks, right? And Glover has that big, wide frame that Green Bay seems to prefer. So I kept Glover as the 9th offensive lineman. And then, this was tough, but Tyler Cooper cut. John Williams, a 7th-rounder this year. 7th-rounder this year, tackle, Cincinnati, I want to say, right? Williams, I cut with the idea that you would hope to get him back on the practice squad. And the reason I chose Glover over Williams, and Williams should have an opportunity, provided he's available come training camp, but Williams, your 7th-round rookie, just missed mandatory minicamp with an injury, so you didn't get to see much. And again, that holds weight. That matters. Glover was there. Williams wasn't available. So Williams, to me, is a practice squad candidate, and Kadeem Telfort, I cut him as well, and opted to keep Travis Glover. So I went 9 offensive linemen: Rasheed Walker, Jordan Morgan, Zach Tom, Anthony Bell, Aaron Banks, Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Jacob Monk, Travis Glover. And again, some of you might have 10. You say, John Williams, they used a draft pick on him this year. I know he missed minicamp. Give him the 10th spot. Kadeem Telfort, he's been with the Packers for a couple of years. Give him the 10th spot. Fine. Like, I hear you out. In mine, I just kept 9. Mitch, I am on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciative of all the support. Trying to hit that 200 subscriber mark sooner rather than later. That's the offensive side. Again, recapping: 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 7 wide receivers, 3 tight ends, 9 offensive linemen. We go to defense now, and let's go to defensive end. I didn't lump together the whole defensive line. I wanted to split it apart. I went with 6 defensive ends, and I'll tell you why. I went with Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, a pair of rookies in Baron Sorrell and Colin Oliver, and then 2 returning players, Kingsley Enagbari and Brenton Cox Jr. A lot of people are going to have Green Bay only keeping 5 defensive ends, and they're going to have it be Gary, LVN, the 2 rookies, Sorrell and Oliver, and then one of Enagbari or Brenton Cox. I've already seen some people map out their own plans on Twitter for the 53-man roster, and a lot of people have that 5 spot as the number at defensive end, with the last spot being Brenton Cox Jr., Kingsley Enagbari. Here's why I kept 6. There is way, way, way too much unknown to only keep 5 at defensive end. There just is. You have 2 rookies who kind of seem like locks to make the final 53-man roster, but it was a 4th and a 5th round pick. And do I like Baron Sorrell and Colin Oliver? Sure, absolutely. But it's far from a guarantee that you're going to get production or even anything consistent in steady reserve roles for them, both as rookies. Then you have LVN, who's a 3rd-year player, 13th overall pick 3 years ago out of Iowa, and he has been the definition of inconsistent for Green Bay in 2 years. He's been invisible at times on the field. Then you have Rashawn Gary, just 7.5 sacks last year. Never really found a groove in Jeff Hafley's scheme, at least in year 1, although I would say 5.5 of the 7.5 sacks came in the second half of the year, so maybe he started to find a rhythm, started to find a groove and some comfortability within Hafley's system. Rashawn Gary certainly spearheads the group at defensive end, but again, consistency problems. I know a lot of people will look at just the total number, and they'll say, Green Bay had 45 sacks last year. That was tied for 8th in the NFL. 15 of them came in 2 games against a woeful Tennessee Titans offensive line and a terrible Seattle starting 5 later on in the year. So a third of your sacks for the entire year, 15 of the 45, came in 2 games. You can't look at the base number of 45 sacks, see that Green Bay was tied for 8th, and draw the conclusion that, hey, they didn't really have a problem with sacks and getting to the quarterback last year. It's a bit misleading. 15 of them came in 2 games. Green Bay went through large stretches. They went damn near through full games without even breathing on an opposing quarterback. To me, they do not have the luxury. They should not have the comfortability to only keep 5 defensive ends. I think there's too much unknown. There's too many question marks, especially with inconsistency. The more options you have, the better chance you have of solving the riddle. They are putting a lot of eggs into the basket of banking in on Lucas Van Ness, making a pretty sizable, dramatic leap forward in 2025. If that doesn't come to the light, if that doesn't come to fruition, and you only keep 5 defensive ends, Green Bay could be scattering to find production. Everyone's excited about the 2 rookies, Oliver and Sorrell, right? You know you have the vets. Well, Rashawn Gary, the vet, and the 3rd-year player, LVN. Then you have, to me, what are pretty solid depth pieces in both Kingsley Enagbari and Brenton Cox Jr. Keep in mind, Brenton Cox Jr. didn't get an opportunity until Preston Smith was traded to Pittsburgh around that halfway point. But for all those that are okay with releasing Brenton Cox Jr. or Kingsley Enagbari because you only want 5 defensive ends, I'll remind you of this. In 2 of the last 3 games to end the year that he played in last year, Brenton Cox outsnapped Lucas Van Ness, your first-round pick. That was not a mistake. That was not an accident. That was production-based. That Brenton Cox was on the field for more snaps 2 of the last 3 games than Lucas Van Ness. And for the season, stretch it out into the grand scheme of things. Kingsley Enagbari, 540? I think he had almost 80 or 90 more snaps total played, Enagbari did, than Lucas Van Ness. That's not an accident. That's not a mistake. That was Lucas Van Ness underperforming. I'm not giving up on LVN yet. He talked about a thumb injury as really hampering him for much of the season. Take that for what you will. Invest in it as much as you want or however much you don't want to invest in that idea. My point is, Brenton Cox Jr., Kingsley Enagbari, it shouldn't come down to one or the other. Keep both. You might need both as depth pieces if things don't go, according to plan. If Rashawn Gary and LVN don't, light the league on fire to start the year or show any sort of consistency. I think keeping 6 defensive ends, because you didn't address it in free agency, and you addressed it in the draft, but you did so with a 4th and a 5th round pick, has left Green Bay in a spot where I think keeping 6 defensive ends instead of 5 should be a necessity for them. So I kept 6 in Gary, LVN, the 2 rookies, Brenton Cox Jr. and Kingsley Enagbari. Defensive tackle, we can keep it short for this one. To me, this was pretty easy. Defensive tackle, it's 5. It's Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, Colby Wooden, Warren Brinson, the 6th round pick out of Georgia, and then you try to sneak Nazir Stackhouse back on the practice squad. I don't see a case for 4. I don't see a case for 6. With including Stackhouse, I think you try to get him back on the practice squad. To me, defensive tackle was easy. It was 5. Clark, Wyatt, Brooks, Wooden, Brinson. There you go. Doesn't take nearly as much of the mental gymnastics or the brain crunch as you might have at defensive end, offensive line, or wide receiver. Inside linebacker, we can do this with inside linebacker too. Again, to me, inside linebacker, pretty easy. It's 5. It's Quay Walker. It's Edgerrin Cooper, Isaiah McDuffie, Isaiah Simmons, and Tyron Hopper. Walker, Cooper, McDuffie, Simmons, Hopper, and then Christian Welch, practice squad candidate. Javon Johnson, practice squad candidate. I don't think the number is 6. I sure as hell don't think the number is 7. I think 5 is the sweet spot, and there's 5 locks. I would say 4 locks. Isaiah Simmons, maybe not, but man, you love his versatility, but you love even more that he seems to be giddy that Green Bay is just going to let him focus on inside linebacker and let him run with that, and he can offer you some help in special teams. You could play the guy in the slot at safety if you needed to. Like, you can bounce him around. You could put him on the defensive end spot if you need to, but sounds like they're going to let him focus on inside linebacker, which I like. I view him as close to a lock as you can get at inside linebacker. To me, the number is 5, and it's pretty easy. Safety. What do we got? Safety, corner, and then, we'll end with special teams, but special teams is pretty easy too. Safety and corner. Safety you could go for. Theoretically, I went 5. I went 5 at safety. Xavier McKinney is as good as it gets at the position. I mean, as all-pro caliber safety, Xavier McKinney. Then you have a pair of second-year pros that you're hoping can take that next step. Evan Williams and Javon Bullard. Bullard is sort of the wild card of the duo. Bullard got the start week 1 in Brazil against Philadelphia at the starting safety spot. Next to Xavier McKinney, never really fully grasped it. Seemed to do better when they moved him to the slot and closer to the line of scrimmage. Evan Williams then, and Bullard was a 2nd-round pick. Williams was 4th round out of Oregon. Williams then took that starting safety spot, and he did grab a hold of it. And he did look far more comfortable than Javon Bullard did. Doesn't mean Bullard can't go back to being a starting safety and thrive. Doesn't mean you can't put him in the slot this year now that Jair's out of the equation. And you likely have Keyshawn Nixon and Nate Hobbs on the outside at corner and see if that works for Bullard in year 2. But you have 2 second-year guys. Again, you have 3 locks right there at safety in Xavier McKinney, Javon Bullard, and Evan Williams. And then I kept Katan Oladapo and Zane Anderson. To me, Zane Anderson, when he was kind of thrown into the ring of fire at safety, showed he's more than just a filler piece. He's not someone that's going to be a huge weak link at safety if called upon. And then we know his value on special teams. And that word, again, I'm going to use as versatility. We know how much Green Bay gravitates towards it. Zane Anderson has it with versatility playing on teams. And Oladapo is just, to me, he's too young and too promising of a project/prospect to just cut ties with now. And so, yeah, I have 5 at safety in McKinney, Bullard, Williams, Anderson, and Oladapo. Cornerback, very interesting. Some would say 4, some would say 5, some might say 6. I say meet in the middle. I went with 5. 3 locks, clear as day. Keyshawn Nixon, Nate Hobbs, and Carrington Valentine. 3 locks. They're going to be on the 53-man roster no matter what. And then things get really, really interesting. I kept Kamal Haddon and Kalen King. Those are my 5. Micah Robinson, you used a 7th-round pick on him this year. I get it. I think Green Bay was starting to come around after the draft to the idea of Jair Alexander coming back on a restructured contract. He didn't want to do that. So Jair's out of the frame. I could see some saying, well, you kept 6 defensive ends because you're worried about consistency and production and things of that nature. Now Jair's out of the picture, but you're only keeping 5 corners instead of 6. I would say you have a better grasp and a better idea of a way better grasp and idea of what you're going to get with Nixon, Hobbs, and Valentine as your top 3 as a trio at corner than what you're going to get at defensive end out of, there's Gary, who you like. You feel good about what you're going to get out of Rashawn Gary, but then after that, do you have any idea what they're going to get out of LVN in year 3? What about the 2 rookies, Baron Sorrell, Colin Oliver? We don't know. Eneg Bari, Brenton Cox, good depth pieces. Like, a lot more question marks at defensive end, which is why I kept 6 there and just 5 at corner. It was tough to push Micah Robinson off. Thought about keeping 6 corners and slicing down maybe a wide receiver, but I went with 5 corners and then just kind of cross your fingers that you can get Robinson, a 7th-round pick, back on the practice squad because, again, we know how much Green Bay values versatility. We also know how much they value their draft picks, and I have 2. Both were 7th-rounders. Yeah, I have 2. Micah Robinson, the corner out of Tulane, and John Williams, the O-lineman out of Cincinnati, both rookie 7th-round picks. I have them being released on this post-minicamp 53-man roster prediction with the hope that you get both on the practice squad. And then we finish with special teams. Brandon McManus is your kicker. Daniel Whalen is your punter. Matthew Orzik is your long snapper. Maybe there's some competition at long snapper. I don't know. But you get 3. You get a kicker, punter, long snapper. Boom. There's your 53-man roster. Would love to hear your guys' opinions, where you disagree with me, where you would add at different spots, take away from different spots. Again, it was uncomfortable for me to keep 7 receivers, but you talk about versatility and what McCole Hardman can give you in the return game, what Bo Melton can give you on special teams in general, and the fact that they're flirting with him at cornerback with the idea of it. People will have different takes on this. It's completely fine. I don't look at all at the Bo Melton trying him out at corner thing as the Packers saying, hey, we really don't see a spot for this guy on the 53-man roster. Last resort for him. Can he try to give us something at corner? I don't see it that way, especially with his contributions on special teams. I just see it as Green Bay trying to sort of try out different things, see if something might work. Keep in mind, Lucas Van Ness, he was seen at the interior of the defensive line in certain looks during minicamp. Is LVN on the chopping block? No. Well, why are they trying him at the interior? Leave no stone unturned. That's kind of the mantra for Green Bay with some of these decisions in some of these situations. So I don't look at the Bo Melton cornerback thing and say, man, it's a last resort, last chance for him to make the roster. I don't think that's the viewpoint for the Packers. Let me know what you think with this 53-man roster. Give me your thoughts on where you'd add, where you would subtract. Always appreciative of all the support. It is Mitch. I am on YouTube. We'll see you next time.